Welcome to Geraint, the home of modern Welsh politics.
Without any further ado, I would like to introduce our two co-hosts of the Geraint podcast, Matthew Hexter and Ceri Davies.
Thank you very much, Rich. What a few weeks we have seen in Wales. It is truly historic times. Vaughan Gething has won the Welsh Labour leadership contest and has been duly installed as First Minister of Wales. Another male leader representing a Cardiff seat, but notably the first black leader of a European nation. The newly appointed First Minister has wasted no time in assembling his team to try and balance his supporters' ambitions with the wider party unease at the recent contest. Standing on the Tays Park steps last week, he outlined his vision to lead with hope, ambition and unity. But tonight we're joined by a variety of guests to look back at the last few weeks and at the challenges and opportunities ahead. So may I please first introduce Sarah Murphy, the member of the Senedd for Bridgend. Sarah, are you there?
I am here. Hopefully this is working. Good evening, everyone.
Coming through loud and clear. And also Tom Hoyles, who is the GMB Policy Officer for Wales and the West of England. Hello, Tom.
Good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, coming through loud and clear. So let's start at the very, very beginning of the contest. It was always widely thought that there would be a woman involved. But was it a disappointment to you, Sarah, that this was not the case? And why do you think this was the case?
It was disappointing because I don't think it's good for anybody, honestly. I also don't think that having a two-person race is ideal. And I hope that we never do that again. And I hope that we have a woman in future. But I was disappointed but not surprised. I'll be honest with you. I think that the atmosphere, and I won't speak for other women or my female colleagues here, but my take on it is that there is an atmosphere of getting fed up of being the token woman. I think it makes us all feel better when a woman stands, but they aren't expected to win. So who wants to put themselves through that? And this is not everyone. I'm generalising here, and I'll be very honest. I think I've been guilty of this myself, but we cannot keep saying next time you'll have to be a woman.
Tom, what's your thought on this?
Yeah, look, I agree. I think it was very disappointing. I think there was a bit of a phony war that ran on for a couple of years between Jeremy and Vaughan for quite a while, and I think that, to be honest with you, most people got sucked into that. But at some point we all need to address, not just in the Labour Party, the lack of women candidates for the role of First Minister and the underrepresentation of women in a lot of public roles. This isn't unique in the Welsh Labour leadership. It's not unique in Welsh government. It is something that is throughout our politics. And we need to get more serious about dealing with that. And that's one of the things GMB is looking at internally in our own systems, try and get more people to stand for election to the Senedd and to the council. But, it's a big, big problem. And I think it's just symptomatic of a much wider problem.
Sarah, the party does have a fairly good record on picking female candidates. However, this has tended to come through the use of the all-women shortlist system. Do you think that the party does have broader structural issues that things like AWS has sort of plastered over in recent years?
Potentially. I mean, I agree with everything that Tom said as well. And I just want to come in and say that, my unions, GMB being one of them, has always been extremely supportive of me. And that's been invaluable, really, what the trade unions are doing. We just have to look at the facts here sometimes, though, right? Like, there's 17 Welsh Labour women in the Senedd at the moment. And I believe, and this is my own kind of like calculations and pulling things together, there's only a handful that came through on a mechanism, on an open shortlist, not on a AWS or women shortlist mechanism. I believe at the moment we don't currently have any Welsh Labour women MPs that were selected on an open shortlist. We did have Ann Clwyd and Madeleine Moon, and they were the last two. However, obviously Becky Gittins has been selected now for Clwyd East, which is tremendous. So I agree with everything that Tom was saying. There is a much kind of wider problem here that we have to tackle, and we have to be very honest about. And I think potentially not having a woman stand will open up more discussion around this and dialogue. I don't think we should kind of sweep it under the carpet. Like Tom is saying, the unions, GMB, are looking within their own structures, and I think that we need to do this as well. And let me just say as well that we've only ever elected white women to the Senedd, and that's just not good enough 25 years in. So I'm really hoping that this will also open up a wider conversation about that and what we need to do to address it, because I don't think that it's currently working.
I mean, one way to look at it is that actually, I think Geraint put some research out in International Women's Day showing the kind of stats. And the truth is, Welsh Labour, and you would expect this probably as the largest political force in Wales, is way out in front in getting women into roles, and not just women, ethnic minorities too. But the truth is, actually, there's still a lot more to do. I think this, as I said earlier, I think this highlights, this is a symptom, not the cause. More work needs to be done at every level to encourage women to stand, not just for, we shouldn't just look at the office of First Minister. Every public office in Wales is important. We should be looking at how we get more women into those roles, but not just in politics, also in the business sphere, also in other forms of public service. Women have so much to offer, and it can't be right that they are absolutely pushed out, in which they mainly are at the moment for a host of things. I think another thing that we need to look at that is the way people are treated in public life. We all love to give politicians a kick, but it isn't a particularly appealing job to do. And we need to think about those people who are in public office. If we're trying to encourage our best and brightest, and there's more work to do in how we get to those people from women from women from different backgrounds, as well as other groups of ethnic minorities. There's so much to do. So we need to think about the package as a whole. It isn't just as simple as all women shortlist. Some great work has been done on that, although in recent years it feels like we've gone slightly backwards. So we'd like to see more done on that. But we also need to think more about how we get a package. If you give yourself to public service, if you're willing to put yourself through it, the truth is you should get a better deal than you currently do.
Well, just to say, Tom touched on it there as well, the kind of like online abuse and these things, and I would say it is true, women do experience kind of like misogynistic and sexist online abuse, but I would say as well that my two male colleagues who stood this time, the racist and homophobic abuse that they were subjected to was horrendous, and online and offline, and I think that I have tremendous respect for anybody who puts themselves forward. I think that there was quite a lot made. People were kind of saying that they were very similar, but I do think that there were differences in what they were putting forward, and I think that the hustings, and I think that the trade union hustings that they both spoke at kind of presented that. But the fact is, we are from the same party, and we do share very much the same values and where we want to get to, maybe just going about it kind of slightly differently. So I still, have tremendous respect, and I'm really proud of the contest that happened, and I'm really, and here we are. I'm pleased, and I'm very kind of proud of Vaughan Gething being our new First Minister. But I would say, and I don't know if Tom would agree with me on this, but I think it's more that in future it would be better, and I think it has been better in the past when we've had 3 or 4 candidates. I do think you then get a little bit more, interest in ideas and discussion. I think it was quite difficult really for Vaughan and Jeremy to do those hustings, and it's just going back and forth just between the two of them. I think we need more next time.
I agree. The issue when you have 2 candidates is it becomes adversarial, and actually that's not what the contest should be about, in our opinion. Broadly, we welcome both candidates. Jeremy and Vaughan are both GMB members, and we've worked with them closely on a lot of things over a long period of time. They're both immensely talented. And I think one of the things that we need to look at this time is how the Labour Party has changed over recent years. We're looking at a situation where you've got Vaughan, whose background is in the trade union movement as a trade union lawyer, helping some of the poorest in our society with workplace issues, health and safety. He was the first black chair of Wales TUC, and he did that as a GMB member, which we're intensely proud of. Likewise, Jeremy, Jeremy lives 5 minutes up the road from me lived up 5 minutes up the road from me from Pontyddulais, and he went from there to Oxford University to working in the public sector, thriving private sector as a lawyer. And what he saw down there was how you can harness the wealth of this country to make outcomes better, and that's very much at the heart of Jeremy's politics. So I think they're both broadly good candidates, more broadly very good candidates actually, and I think it shows the Labour Party's appetite now to getting stuff done, which I think is probably the next stage of devolution we're getting into, is how do we move devolution on over the next 25 years. The issue kind of comes when it becomes an adversarial system, because you have two candidates. Everyone thinks they're fighting against each other, but actually what they're both trying to do is get their ideas out for them as an individual candidate. There are differences between the two. I don't necessarily buy that there's a wafer thin disagreement between them, but they are of the same movement. So there is a lot that they have in common, and the problem is it gets pitted as one against the other, when actually what they're both trying to do is communicate their vision. So more candidates, we think, would have made a difference to that. And I think I want to pick up a point that Sarah made there about some of the abuse. One of the things I think that women candidates, that black candidates, and that Jeremy as a homosexual candidate faced is a different kind of abuse. It isn't about broadly corruption, all that kind of stuff. It is, there are racial, homophobic and sexist trolls. The amount of women politicians that have to go through their daily life with people decide to tell them as jokes, but just loads of trolls pushing rape tweets at them is disgraceful and not acceptable in any part of the line. So I think there's a very thing we need to reflect there after this process, is that how can we develop those things so that candidates are judged on what they say and what they do, not what their background is.
Well, I'm going to skip ahead, and thank you very much for those contributions. And we're going to move forward a little bit to talk about the new government and the new direction, if any, that Vaughan Gething will lead. The obvious place to start with that is with the cabinet. And we now know not only who is going to be in that government, but what portfolios they have. But I wonder if you could give your initial reaction to both the portfolios and the personalities that are now going to be leading the Welsh government.
I was very excited to see it. And it's quite an exciting day, isn't it, when everyone's kind of guessing and things are coming out, and you're kind of messaging your colleagues and being like, have you heard anything? It was it is an exciting day behind the scenes. I have to say, one of the first things that I noticed was that my colleague and friend Jane Bryant is now in government, and I'm absolutely thrilled that the early years has been incorporated into the mental health portfolio. Jane is so passionate about this, and this is something that in the committee, the Equality and Social Justice Committee that I'm on, was calling for. Like, we needed somebody who was going to fully kind of like take over and lead on early years and children. So I think that's tremendous. Hugh Davies, my neighbouring member of the Senedd, is going to be fantastic. He has such energy, and he's got some really juicy topics there with climate change and rural affairs. And then, of course, North Wales Minister Ken Skates is back, and I'm thrilled about that. But I just wanted to say I do really want to thank Lee Waters and Julie Morgan for everything that they've done, and particularly I want us, I hope, as a movement, as a country, really, to continue to push forward on the work that Julie did for removing profit from the care of children. It's not quite there yet. It's going to take about another year, and I don't want us to lose that. I want that to continue. So they were my initial thoughts.
If I could pick up with that, was there much of a surprise about the margin of victory in the circles of Labour supporters, or was it pretty much as people expected it to be, very, very tight in the end?
Yeah, I think it was. I think everybody knew it was going to be very close. Maybe not quite that close. I thought they'd probably be like a 5%, if I'm honest. And when we were in the room and it was announced, you're just told, who's won. So it wasn't until afterwards then that you find out the figures, and it was very close. But yeah, I don't think that's massively surprising, really, just based on everything that Tom and I have already said this evening.
And we're moving into the policy section of the show, Sarah. What do you think are the kind of key policy areas that Vaughan and the new cabinet really have to focus on in these first few months?
Well, we've got some things that need to be addressed right now, if they can be addressed. And that's obviously what is happening with the farmers and the farming community and the sustainable farming scheme. I also think it will be really interesting to see what can be done, like I said, with that early years brief. We obviously have the junior doctors strikes happening right now. We're working very hard to keep the waiting list and the NHS, to continue improving. I'm glad, actually, I'm very relieved that Eluned Morgan has stayed in the position. She's doing a lot of work now on the women's equality health strategy, and I'm pleased that she's going to be seeing that through. So there are some very immediate things, and we can't forget that, this is the backdrop to this is our budgets, and the money that's coming to Wales from UK government is just being slashed all over the place. And not only that, but Rebecca Evans, our finance minister, will say this all the time. We are told by UK government usually like a week before what some of the consequentials of the Barnett formula are going to be. It's almost impossible to try to plan like that when you just haven't got a UK government who's working with us.
Yeah, I think we plan to do a finance pod sometime this year to look at some of those problem areas. I don't know if Tom's still with us. Tom, are you still there?
Yeah, sure. Can I come back on the margin stuff quickly? Is that
Yeah,
that all right?
Please do.
I just think it's an important thing, because I think everybody, what I found really interesting about this from the commentariat has been that there have been just numbers picked out of the air, loads of different places. There's been the discussions. Apparently, Vaughan was going to be won by a landslide. We were told at one point that everything would be retired. I mean, if you go back to that opening weekend of this Senedd members' nominations, when Hannah decided not to run and Jeremy mopped up that support very, very quickly, at that point, Jeremy was odds on to win it. And I think that we need to remember in this stuff, Vaughan has faced challenges as well, as he's the first black leader of a Western European country, that there are lots of reasons for that. And a big part of Vaughan's campaign has been building the resources, knowing that black candidates generally need to perform to a higher standard than other candidates. And that's no reflection on Jeremy. That's nothing to do with Jeremy. That's to do with Vaughan and knowing what black candidates face when they go on to those things. So all in all, it was always going to run to a tight finish, everything taken into account. And I think it's pretty much ended where we thought maybe a percentage point here or there, and reflects what we were hearing on the phones with the affiliates and with the electorate at large.
Obviously, there's been we've just had a Plaid Cymru conference this weekend, and whilst I don't dwell on the policy therein too much, but obviously a lot of noise has been made with regards to the cooperation deal and how long that has left to run. What do you think is the significance of the cooperation deal between Plaid Cymru and the Welsh Government moving forward? Do you think that the shelf life of that is now running out? And what do you think Vaughan's election as First Minister and Welsh Labour leader means for the cooperation between those two parties moving forward? Obviously, we're very likely to see a 96-member Senedd after the next election, which will make the prospect of coalition very much more likely. How do you think that Vaughan will be able to work with Plaid Cymru and the other opposition parties, Tom?
Well, it wouldn't be a Hirith podcast without me coming on to talk about electoral reform, would it? So
it's why we get you on, mate.
Yeah,
it's why we get you on.
Just for anyone else who hasn't heard some of the previous podcasts, I'm not a fan of electoral reform. Not just in terms of what it is. I just think it's an intensely dry subject. Look, there's two things here, isn't there? One is that Plaid Cymru are desperate to define themselves and their position at the moment in a run-up to an election, and then there's also, because electorally they need to have a point of difference from the Labour Party, and then the other side to it is what do they want to achieve on a policy basis. I'm sure, if you're going into this, and we say this as from the point of a trade union, an organisation that is based on negotiations every day, generally you start at hardball and then you find a way across. You find a way to build points where you can find consensus and move forward. my thought is on this, I actually think this has lended itself to Vaughan very well. Vaughan is a consensus builder. That is what he does. That is his style and always has been his style. And my view is that whilst nothing is currently agreed, and Plaid have already mentioned, as far as they're concerned, the cooperation agreement is coming to an end, and something new would need to be drawn up, whether it's now or in the next Senedd. I still think there's opportunities in the short term for a supply and confidence arrangement or something similar. Perhaps something can be worked out with the Lib Dems, but also if Plaid Cymru have any specific issues, they can go to that. I mean, the other thing we need to accept is the Senedd reform isn't done and dusted, so in some way, shape or form, that needs to either continue or be dropped. So I think there's a lot of questions about the whole thing, but I think Vaughan's leadership style will suit himself to it. He can build consensus. I think you've seen that with the new cabinet. You've seen, he didn't just pick from one side. It was a host of everybody. And I think that is because Vaughan thinks that the Labour Party is at its best when people from all wings of the party are involved and playing their role.
Sarah, so just obviously, I'm not reading too heavily into what Tom says. That's not like me, and I wouldn't do that, obviously. But thinking about Senedd reform moving forward, do we think that is safe under Vaughan? And also, what is your thought process relating to the ability of Vaughan to negotiate a coalition deal with Plaid Cymru, or continue to work in partnership with other opposition parties, which is of course necessary in the absence of majority?
Yeah, of course. I mean, my impression afterwards was that Rhys Apiarth was very keen to talk to Vaughan, because at the end of the day, the cooperation agreement is between Welsh Government and Plaid Cymru. And I do think that it has created stability, and I think it's also created a very positive agenda for Wales. And as Tom referred to then, I think that is Vaughan's style. I also think that his new cabinet demonstrates wanting to have that stability as well. But of course, it doesn't make sense to be going into an election period, I suppose, in a cooperation agreement, and that's because more so maybe from Plaid Cymru's perspective, because at the moment anything that's kind of in the cooperation agreement is difficult to kind of to speak on, because we are all together and trying to achieve all those objectives. So we need to achieve ideally all of those objectives, and I do think there's probably a time limit on it. But going forward, then if we were to be in coalition, I remember, I got to see Bertie Ahern speak at Stormont last year, and he said that when they went into the Northern Ireland peace agreement, the way that they decided, to go about the compromise, he said, was you give something, you get something, and no one gets everything they want. And that's something that I've heard a lot of my colleagues kind of refer to as well. It is about that compromise and thinking of the greater good. And I think that's also what we have seen with reform. I haven't had any indication from Vaughan or from anybody else that reform is under threat now, because he's become a leader and First Minister, and I think that we're progressing with that, and it will be the best thing for democracy in Wales.
Thanks, Sarah. I mean, I just want to pick up on going sort of in between policy and the politics of it all over the weekend. Of course, we saw Ken Skates make some comments to say that perhaps the roads review could be reviewed, and that maybe Wales will see the building of new roads in the near future. Tom, what was your assessment of this, and do you think that there has been a necessary change of tact on issues such as SFS and road building, and do you think that is something that Vaughan will be taking forward?
I mean, specifically, I think, both candidates made this quite clear, is that the economy is the priority, right? And I think that, Britain at the moment is facing a lot of economic challenges. And the only way that we will get out of the current economic stagflation, whatever you want to call it, is to focus all our efforts on productive industries. There's been some considerable debate, there's been no doubt about that, about the transport brief, whether that is not building new roads, whether that is the M4 relief road, whether that is where the new train stations are going, whether that is how the metro will continue. I think what Ken is suggesting, and I think what Vaughan would suggest is that there's no, this isn't blanket bans. That's not what they'd be looking at. It is far more case by case basis of what needs to be looked at. The transport links in our country need a lot of work. I don't think anyone disagrees with that, and we need to think about how we best do that. We need to think about how those people in the most deprived communities can get to their work, and they can have access to all the facilities that they should have. And quite often, those in the poorest communities are in the poorest communities because the transport links just aren't up to it. So what the suggestion is stuff will be looked at around. That may include new road building. It may not. But I think the point is not more we've got plans for roads. It is let's look at the whole thing again.
Sarah, regardless of whether you believe in the building of new roads or you believe in the building of new public transport infrastructure, the one thing that Wales will need significantly more of is money. Obviously, we're now looking at a general election later on this year where it's very likely, I think, that Labour will probably be in some way or form the next UK government.
Yeah.
But are you confident that there will be the necessary economic investment from a UK Labour government into the Welsh government that will allow Vaughan to hit some of these ambitious policy areas that he's talking about, whether that be, as we discussed, transport, or whether this be significant investment in our health service?
I think everyone's having to be very realistic. I think Vaughan Gethin is being realistic. I think Keir Starmer is being very realistic. I mean, building on what Tom was saying then about, Ken Skates with his brief, that's also what Ken said in that interview, which Tom referred to, and everything is going to be looked at again, and he wants to really listen. But also he has said, the Tories have crashed the economy, and there are now real difficulties with public spending. And you can hear that, Keir Starmer is being realistic and cautious here. And you can also see with the budgets that the Conservatives have been coming out with recently, it's almost like they're absolutely determined to leave the Labour Party with nothing if and when they come into government. So it's very difficult to make any promises or guarantees, because I don't think anybody really knows what's going on in our UK government treasury at the moment. Having said that, at the end of the day, we are the Labour Party, and we do believe in this investment for the future, but also that it's greener, that it's fairer. As Tom said, everybody is just extremely concerned now about the economy. The statistics saying that tax burdens will continue to rise until 2028 and 2029 is so scary and alarming. But obviously, it's very obvious if we continue as we are under the Conservatives, we're going to be in an even bigger mess. We do need the Labour government to come in. And I do think that Keir Starmer and Vaughan Gethin have a very good working relationship. And these will, the difference is, I'm coming back to what I was saying earlier on. At the moment, UK government tell our Welsh government nothing unless they absolutely have to, and at the last minute. That is not what it would be like if we had a Welsh Labour government in Wales and a UK Labour government. We would be able to plan together. There would be a real seat around the table. These conversations that the Ken is referring to, needing to know about public spending in the future, they would actually be in the room for those. It would make such a huge difference.
Thank you very much to Sarah Murphy, the MS for Bridgend, and Tom Hoyles, the Policy Officer for Wales and the West of England for the GMB Trade Union. We're now going to move on to the second half of our live space, but we're going to invite our policy experts on to speak. So first of all, we have Terry Mackie. Terry had a 45-year career in the education sector and has written extensively about Welsh and UK schools since 2010. We also have Lowri Jackson, who is the Deputy Director of Communications, Policy and Research for the Royal College of Physicians. And then we've also got Geraint Davies. Geraint is a livestock farmer near Bala and has been Director of Natural Resources Wales for the past 6 years. Hello, Geraint, can you hear me?
Noswaith, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely, coming through loud and clear. Geraint, we'll start with you. Rural Affairs has probably been one of the most contentious portfolios this year, obviously with everything going on with the ETFS scheme. Geraint Davies got a big job on his hand in this new administration. What's your assessment of him?
Yeah, no, he's got a big job ahead of him, but my personal take on him is I like him as a person within the ins and outs of Welsh government, as I've come to know him over the last 10 odd years, and he's always come across as a very balanced and willing to listen and talk and debate with you, so that you feel as if you've been able to point out your concerns to him, and through the involvements I've had with him, he's actually gone away and come back with further questions or answers. So to me, yeah, a very balanced person and a great potential now going forward, really, to be able to build a positive relationship within the agricultural community and others around it, especially where we've got the climate change under his portfolio as well now. So it's going to be really, really interesting times with him. But as most of us within the agricultural sector, we are here to help him get it right for Welsh farmers.
Geraint, would you be able to just give us a very quick précis on exactly what the issues are that have been firing themselves up in the last few weeks between farmers and the Welsh Government?
Yeah, so simply put, really, the move from the current BPS, which is a very good way of ensuring the consumers get a value in their shopping basket when they go and do their weekly shopping and so on. So the moving away from that is raising a lot of concern, really. It's not just in Welsh Government, but UK Government, that food security is being pushed further down the agenda for them, and it's important, really. But on the other hand, as well, we have farms that's never been able to qualify to go into agri-environmental schemes, and it's going to be pushing them now into beginning of next year to transition into a sustainable farming scheme, which we don't really have a budget for it and the full ins and outs of it. So there's big concern there coming from farmers. Others are looking forward to playing their part in it, obviously. But then on top of that, you have the water regulations, you've got TB issues here in Wales that aren't being addressed and so on. So it's basically bubbling up to a point the farmers have really pushed back. Obviously, you've seen the protesting and so on against it. And especially when you've seen work that ADAS did on behalf of Welsh Government, pointing out the risk of losing 5,500 jobs to the industry, 200 million off the rural economy from producing food here in Wales. There are massive statistics there that puts rural communities at a huge risk of collapse going forward.
Geraint, I know policy like this is never as simple as there's never a silver bullet. But with Hugh Rankin now in that role, what's the one thing he would do that would impress you if it's his first move in that new role?
So to pause on the current situation with the consultation and obviously take in the responses from the consultation there and maybe look at a more deliverable way than what's come so far for us. I don't know whether they would do that. I kind of hope they will. Personally, to me and most of the farmers in Wales, they want to be part of a scheme where they can play their part in delivering. It's going to be hard if they're not feeling part of that future policy being put together, really. So, yeah, let's hope that he will reevaluate things and take positive steps by working with the farming unions and others to try and get the policy to work going forward for the next generation of farmers to come through and take Wales into a healthier environment in the future.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to now move on to Lowri. Lowri, one of the biggest surprises in this reshuffle was that Eluned Morgan stayed in her job. Was that a surprise to you at all?
I mean, yes. I think certainly the last 2 or 3 months before the leadership election and the reshuffle, talk was that Eluned wanted to move on, that she had had enough. It's a hard job. She's been doing it now for a few years. It's probably the toughest job, I would say, in the cabinet. You have to ask yourself why she agreed to stay on. I think it's always nice as a sector when you are trying to put forward when you're trying to put forward the clinical or the patient voice. The thought of having a fresh pair of eyes is really appealing. And I think the feeling within the sector was perhaps one of, it's mixed feelings, because on the one hand, you've got the continuity You've got somebody in that post then who understands the situation, who knows the key players. You're not going to be spending the first 6 months of their role trying to get them up to date and trying to get meetings in the diary. But at the same time, there is also a feeling that we have put forward the ideas that we have as a sector for improving things. And if they haven't been taken forward, that's probably because the minister herself isn't convinced of the validity of them. So the difficulty then is you end up in a situation where you think, well, what's going to change? If there isn't a fresh pair of eyes looking at this situation, bringing some new ideas to the table, what are we all doing here? We'll have to see what Eluned does in her first 6 months. I mean, what is she going to do that's new, that's going to be new to how, to what she was doing before? You could argue that perhaps it means that the ministerial review that they have commissioned into accountability within the NHS, perhaps that's got a better chance now of being seen through to the conclusion and having its recommendations followed. But I mean, to my knowledge, that report is going to be, I think it has to be submitted by the 31st of March. So we'll see, I suppose, what that comes back with. But I'd say mixed feelings in the sector, yes.
There's a bit of a contrast here between the rural affairs brief and your own. Do you think that it could have been beneficial for things such as the ongoing industrial disputes that we're seeing in the health sector to have a fresh pair of eyes on this brief?
The difficulty with the industrial disputes is that, I mean, there quite simply isn't any money in the service. And we are told that repeatedly. And I think the argument that Welsh Government keep making is probably quite a valid argument, that without that extra resource from a pay settlement in Westminster, and that would have to be, extra money out with the, outside of the health budget, it's very difficult to come up with a way out of that situation. The situation here is different, I think, probably to the situation in England, where Welsh Government has been quite open about the fact that if they could afford it, they would probably come closer to the demands of people who are taking industrial action. So it's an almost impossible question to answer, because you have a government that is able to take both sides of the argument. They will quite happily say, well, we'd love to pay you more, but we simply can't afford it. Direct your frustration across the border, please.
Okay, but I'm going to move on now to Ceri. Ceri, you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming through loud and clear. Thank you very much, Ceri. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I've asked our other two quality experts. What's your assessment of the new Education Minister, Lynn Neagle?
Well, I worked with Lynn about 28 years ago in Torvine, so I do know she's obviously very committed. I don't see any change in policy from what I've seen. I'm going to cast a sort of pall over things. I think we're in a very difficult situation in education. By that I mean schools. We've got a real problem in terms of absenteeism, and there's been a very recent, this month, Institute of Fiscal Studies report, which is called Major Challenges for Education in Wales. I don't know if anybody's read it. It's a sober reading, and they are saying that then we'll need to look at curriculum and a few other things to see whether we are actually on the wrong track. I don't see that there will be any backtracking like that, but I worry greatly. I can't really see the bit in the manifesto that says that Vaughan's going to be putting the weight of the First Minister's office behind achieving excellence in our schools and colleges. When I first read that, I thought, what does that mean? Can anybody help me out?
Thanks, Terry. Education has been for a long time one of these issues where Wales has continued to, at least in reported statistics, underperform. Obviously this is the IFS report last week was very damning, but we've also now got a particularly long history of poor PISA results. Do you think that education could, in a few years' time, become one of these issues that haunts the Welsh Government?
I'm afraid the answer is yes. I got so concerned I wrote a book called The Slow Learning Country in 2019, which was a critical review of the first 20 years of schools under devolution. I don't think on rereading my book, which is obviously now out of date. Very flawed book, by the way, now out of date. But I think the same problems are haunting us. I think we're too far down the road to stop the new curriculum. I think we've got massive problems in terms of teacher workload and morale. And we've also got problems in terms of recruitment of teachers and retention of teachers. That problem is a UK problem as well. But we've got a particular problem because economically we're not as attractive as some of the other parts of the UK. Can I just say one last thing about the IFS report? I don't think it's a great report, not just for Wales. I don't think it's a well-written report. It's what I call McKinseyist reductionist. In other words, it's purely on about PISA and what I call school improvement, as if teaching and learning were the only things that ever went on in schools. Well, the other things that go on in school, we all know about achievement gaps. That's got worse, by the way, and not just because of COVID. The other things that go on in schools are the Welsh language for us, which is very important. That seems to be struggling along its 2050 target. And we haven't really done anything to change. Literacy, and particularly reading and instruction, is a very hot issue for the Welsh Government. And the new curriculum will need to be looked at substantially in terms of that. There is no doubt at all, looking at the comparison with England and other schools who've taken up phonics very systematically, that we've made major errors in terms of our early years literacy and probably numeracy. But I don't think that the IFS report is the be-all and end-all. I think it takes a very narrow view. I think it's ignorant about Welsh culture, I might say. And I know that's a harsh thing to say, but I'm going to say it because I spent a long time reading it. If I tell you I'm actually a member of the IFS, I pay them money every month. You can see that I'm not just somebody who pays their money and weighs in with people. But I think there's a lot of stuff that PISA and data doesn't do. But we have, unfortunately, had now 25 years of very slow progress in our schools. In the next 3 years, we've got a massive task. Is it that we're going to get some more money under Starmer? I doubt it in the first 2 years. Is it that the IFS is right in saying some of our approaches are wrong-headed, and on comparisons with other, certainly with England and other European countries, we're going the wrong way? I don't know. Is it all about resources? I don't think so. I think what we ought to do is to be talking far more with all teachers, not just with teacher unions, because I think we're in a parlous state at the moment. And I'm sorry to be downbeat about this, because I've spent my life in Welsh education and English education, and it should be better than it is after 25 years.
Thank you, Ceri. I'd like to invite all our guests, but I'll open it up to the policy guys first. How much of the issues do you think that are affecting Wales and the Welsh Government boil down to brass tacks, to money? Or do you think there are broader systemic problems with Welsh policy making and with how Wales is being run? And how does this new government tackle this in the next 2 years? Geraint, maybe I can start with you.
Yeah, thank you. So for me now, to get a agricultural policy that's long-term, I want that budget put in place for multiple years ahead, instead of knowing that Welsh Government have to justify the need of it every 12 months. There's people wasting their time just putting everything together so that we can roll on another 12 months of budget allowance into Wales to deliver for the agricultural sector. And it's the same across it all. From my involvement as NRW board member, I find it mad that people are trying to justify and balance the books so that we can justify getting money for another 12 months. You've got everything from inflation and everything linked to it. You've got the powers in Westminster. They could release more funds to Wales so that they can secure and ring fence money to be safe for a certain element of delivery. But most probably every sector within Wales would argue for the same thing. But on a personal level, to me, I want to see things happening for more than 12 months at a time. It feels quite insulting to Wales that Westminster aren't willing to release more funds or commit to releasing more funds so Wales can prosper.
Yeah, if I can come in there, Matt. I mean, I completely agree with you there, Geraint. As I've touched on this a few times this evening. The fact that we can only do an annual funding kind of schedule is really, really frustrating, and it's in many sectors. It's also in the third sector, the charity sector. It is time consuming and frustrating. And one of the goals was for the Welsh Government, and I know Rebecca Evans, our finance minister, was very committed to this, was trying to get to at least like 3-year funding cycles. But at the moment, we haven't been able to achieve that in the way that we wanted to, because, like you said, every year we're having to deal. Well, the Conservative government at the moment moves the goalposts almost every kind of 6 months, and then they also offer money to Wales for things like Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, the electrification of the rail infrastructure, and then they can withdraw it with a click of their fingers, and that's just pulled out from underneath us. So that is a huge hindrance to us. But I also just wanted to say, coming back to the discussion around education, and thank you so much, because I thought all of those comments were so helpful and really helped me as well to understand better. But I did want to say, I think so much of what we're talking about tonight really does come back to workforce. It comes back to people and their jobs, and not being happy and not being stable in their jobs and fulfilled. And that is one of the things a Labour government would do. It would introduce a new deal for working people and deliver a real living wage. And I'm a big fan of the 4-day work week as well. I know it wouldn't work across all sectors, but my dad was a teacher, and I remember as he was getting to the later in his life, and he just said that he had a list of 20 things to do that day, and none of them involved teaching. And I just think that it's about the resources and the support for people as well in all of those sectors.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I'm very much in favour of far more devolution for Wales. I do think we need a new settlement. We haven't got our hands on really any of the big economic levers. I'm very much one for a totally different structure in the whole of the United Kingdom, including devolution for 9 regions of England. So I think what Sarah says about workload and teachers and then the people is 100% right. If I've got a real criticism about the new curriculum, is that it forgot workload, it forgot teachers, and it went absolutely hell for leather on assessment, subjects, what key stages, and all the rest. In other words, it got incredibly technical, whereas actually what you really need is good people in front of kids, so they become good kids. One of the things that annoyed me about the IFS report is that it actually compared our poverty for the poverty in England. That's absolutely ridiculous as a comparison. You can't compare our levels of poverty or socioeconomic difficulty with England. You have to compare it with the poor regions of England. So a lot of the stats there is actually wrong. And also, we have to remember that we're in a very unusual European situation in that we're the little brother next to the big brother of England. And no other country in Europe actually faces that, as far as I know. So, I think that, I mean, I'm a very much a Starmer man, and I welcome Vaughan Gethin. I wasn't a supporter of Jeremy Miles. I welcome what Vaughan might achieve, but the task is huge, and most of it is systemic. So, but having said all that about systemicness, doing something about the people who are the deliverers and getting their confidence up, because there is no doubt what's happened in the last 5 years has actually depleted confidence. I hope Vaughan looks at that. Thanks for listening.
Tom, what's your thought on the money side of things?
Cash is king, isn't it? We've got to be honest about it. It is a big problem. Our public services face two big issues. One, the people who are involved in them haven't been paid properly for 10 years or more. And that's a big problem, not just because those people are likely to be the people who use our public services most likely, and are those people who are not putting the same amount of money in the economy they should be, but also because those public services, apart from being chronically underfunded, do not have enough research and investment in. The next 10 years there's going to be a lot of public sector reform. under the Labour government. Not touch wood, should Labour get in. I don't think we should take that as a predetermined outcome.
Yeah.
Labour, and I say this as a Labour Party member, has a way of screwing this up in a way any other party can only dream of. The other thing, so in terms of that public sector reform, we can't run the NHS in the way it's been run for a long period of time. More money is being pumped into the NHS over a period of time now, but it's just not productively dealing with the issues in there. And we need to look at how we can harness new technologies, new techniques, and the new running of the service. That will only be achieved successfully with engagement with the workforce. And Labour nationally are starting to get that. In Wales, we're already ahead of the game. The truth is, the people who will be able to fix our public services best are those who work in it. Look, the next 10 years, it's not going to be fun. It's not fun now. It's going to be a hard time. But actually, when we get through the tunnel, there's light at the end of the tunnel. When we get through it, we'll have a health service, education service, and the rest of it that's fit for the 21st century.
So it feels like received wisdom at this stage that, we put too much money into the NHS and it's not productive enough, etc., etc. Now, I would absolutely agree that the workforce, that we need to be engaging with and working with the workforce on this. Where I would disagree, perhaps, is that we're doing that already. I think that, yes, Welsh Government has a partnership approach that they talk about. I would say that is then confined to perhaps the unions and a handful of organisations. I wouldn't say that engagement happens, almost like Ceri said, it doesn't happen with the workforce itself. It happens with the people who have been elected to do that through their unions. Fine, but it's not the same thing as engaging with the wider workforce. I think the thing that a lot of people sort of forget when we're talking about the fact that we pump all this money into the NHS, and I don't disagree, it's half the Welsh budget, it's a huge amount of money, but the people that we are seeing coming through the front door of the hospital now are sicker, frailer, older.
Yep.
They need that investment, they need that money. And so it's a false comparison, I think, to talk about the illnesses that we saw coming into hospital 20, 30, 40 years ago, because everything is so much more complex now. And we hear that from, the doctors that we speak to on the, who are your juniors who are clerking people in. Clerking people takes so much longer than it used to because people have so many more things wrong with them. People end up staying in hospital for so much longer than they used to because they have so many more things wrong with them. The specialist model of care no longer applies. But what we haven't done in the last 20 years is kind of look ahead and catch up with that. So we are still training people who are very highly specialist in particular areas. But what we're not training perhaps is that doctor or that senior clinician who will have that breadth of knowledge across a million different areas of medicine, that they will be able to pull all of that together into a diagnosis and treat the whole person. And that's something that I think we have talked about for a long time, but haven't actually managed successfully to pin down the solution. So I think on the health budget question, it's too simplistic to say that we need to start being more productive or spending money on prevention. Of course, we need to do all of those things, but it hasn't happened. And if something hasn't happened and yet everybody has signed up to the theory that it should, you have to ask yourself, well, why hasn't it happened? And I think that's the question that's missing at the moment. We have the minister, we have people going into conferences and giving keynote speeches about how prevention is the way forward. Well, fine, but if we all know that, why hasn't it happened?
True.
Thank you so much, Lowri, and thank you again so much to all of our experts that have spoken this evening. Before we go, I have one last question. This is the only question that's going to come to you from live from France this evening, but also a question about a much maligned and underrepresented area of Wales, which is North Wales. Before we go, I would be keen to hear everyone's thoughts on the role of the Minister for North Wales, and also what they think this will mean for the future now that Ken Skates is in this role. And maybe I'll start with Tom.
Oh, well, thank you for the hospital pass there straight away, Mackie. So, look, I think I saw something commented earlier, and I think it was a nice line, which was saying that every minister should be a minister for North Wales, and I understand that, but the point of the matter is there is a perception issue in North Wales that there's a feeling of being left behind. And we've seen what that has done over the last 10 years in parts of the United Kingdom. We've seen the Brexit vote. We've seen all the other problems with it as well. I just think that actually having someone around the table whose responsibility it is to make that work, to bring up North Wales at every point, at every table, which they should all be doing, is helpful. I think Ken is an immensely talented politician, and I think he'll put some good work and some good legroom into that. So I think it's a good move, and we'll look forward to seeing where it comes from.
Yeah, I echo everything that Tom said. I'm so pleased to see Ken back in this role. I know that he is extremely passionate about it. I do agree, everybody has a responsibility to North Wales, but we have to be realistic. There is perceived to be, at least, this North Wales, South Wales divide, and having somebody to champion North Wales is crucial. The very first visit today that Keir Starmer and Vaughan Gething have done together is to North Wales. I think that's very significant. And I also think that, one of the things that Ken has said in his entire brief really is that he really does want to listen. And I think that he's going to be incredibly well placed to do that and really reflect what the people of North Wales want.
Geraint, Lowri or Ceri, any thoughts on the Minister for North Wales?
Well, I just say before I go is that I'm a shocking South Walian, but just making all policy simply centralised and applying to the whole of the country does seem to me a little out of date, and I think there should be built in far more flexibility, certainly in terms of schools. I think when you get obsessed with something like a national curriculum and you have a very complex country. I can't remember what Rodri Morgan says about centrifugal forces and everything. We've got to find out, I know Ken Skates will, find out a lot more about how the people in and our public services in North Wales are actually perceiving us and we're perceiving them. And I hope there'll be some work on that. But I hope that flows through into policy, because I'm philosophically against broad brush, always centralised policies.
I find it quite difficult, this idea that you have a Minister for North Wales. I mean, the portfolio that made me giggle was, economy, energy, and the Welsh language. Like, who walloped the Welsh language in with the economy and it's just such a sort of disparate group of. And I always think, if you're the Minister for Welsh language, like, surely the Minister for Education should be worrying about Welsh language in education, and the Minister for Health should be worrying about Welsh language and health. You're not going to mainstream this stuff if you hive it off into. So I feel with with the Minister for North Wales, I can see what the theory is, but I do feel like it does worry me that it risks being, Ken will worry about that happened up in Gwynedd. And actually I think that is such a reductionist way of looking at it, when for me, it's a really it gives the ownership and the responsibility to somebody else, and it means that the rest of the cabinet don't have to think about it, and it shouldn't have to be on Ken to be constantly going, but have you thought about? So for me, I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, I think anything that gives North Wales a louder voice at the table, fabulous, but I do have some reservations. I personally think that North Wales should be a priority for every single minister in that cabinet, not just the Minister for North Wales.
Geraint, if you've got any, you can close this out with your final comments.
Yeah, no, some very valid, fair points there from Lowri. It should be on every minister's view that North Wales is important. To me, as somebody from North Wales, I do feel as if we are left behind from public transport to all manner of different things. But if I can just point out one fantastic achievement from North Wales that's happened recently. My local high school, they had 4 rugby teams in the girls' Road to Principality competition, and it showed that the investment into grassroots rugby there has developed into something where North Wales is on the map. And then again, the county was playing against another North Wales team at the weekend at the Principality Stadium. It shows that invest properly into North Wales will really, really deliver. And there's a massive potential there ahead if Ken can get it right. And as Lowri said, every other minister within Welsh Government should play their parts to get it right for North Wales to prosper going forward, isn't it?
Thanks, Geraint. And thank you again to Sarah Murphy, MS, Tom Hoyles from the GMB, Terry Mackie, Lowri Jackson and Geraint Davies. And I just wanted to close out this evening by wishing Vaughan Gethin and his new cabinet well, because regardless of your political affiliation, we need them to succeed. Every single one of us who lives or cares for Wales needs this and every government that follows them to be a success, because there are many, many challenges facing Wales. And we should all put our efforts into making sure that regardless of what field we work in, they are aiming towards the best country that Wales can be. So thank you very much to all our panelists. Thank you very much for listening and joining us. If you like what you hear from Hiraeth, you can find everything out on the Twitter page at HiraethPod. You can go to our website, www.walespolitics.com. And thank you very much for supporting us with your ears. But if you would like to do so with your wallet, you can go to www.patreon.com/HiraethPod. Diolch yn fawr iawn, pawb.
Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.